So I'm going to go into the presenter mode. And when I was asked to provide this presentation, I did so on the basis that we were going to be discussing a topic that's very, very important, and that relates to the changing nature of what consumers are going to look like as we move into a post-pandemic period. And I think we can all really hope that we are definitely moving into that era, the fact that we are moving out from the period of the pandemic and perhaps in 2021 getting into a more state of normal. And I know that everyone's talking about what that will look like. And really at the macro level, none of us actually know. But I think that we have a good idea about what consumers are going to look like as it relates to their willingness to purchase, how they're going to purchase, what the nature of their expectations around customer experience are going to be, and how the contact center industry is going to need to respond in kind. Now, I'm also very conscious that we're in a presentation today where there is simultaneous translation going on, I believe in English and German. And with that in mind, I'm going to take my pace a little bit slower than I usually would in order for the translators to catch up. And Begum, can you tell me how many people are actually listening on translation right now?
I'll ask and I give you the information.
Okay, sure. Yeah, but there are a number of people who are getting translated, right?
It's 50.
50 people. Okay,
50,
cool.
yes.
So there's a good number of people that are having translation done. So again, I will keep my pace as manageable as possible, shall we say. So in terms of the structure of the talk I'm going to give, just a very quick introduction, and then I'll be going into some elements about what, in my view and my opinion, and from what I've been hearing from my clients, a post-pandemic consumer is going to look like. And some of the key elements that we'll be looking at here are going to involve how a consumer is likely to appear in terms of their behavior. What are going to be some of the key traits that they're going to exhibit from a behavioral standpoint? And this will be very important in terms of defining the elements about how they're going to be buying. You know, if we think about going out and purchasing something, whether it's a washing machine or a car or a new telephone or perhaps a fast moving consumer good, the way that we've been doing this in the past up until 2020 has changed significantly. And the post-pandemic consumer is likely to have a very different approach in terms of how they buy, not only what they buy, but how they're buying as well. And I want to talk a little bit about this. Now, obviously, we're in a contact center conference, and I know that the channels that will be used to support a post-pandemic consumer are going to be very, very important as well. We've been seeing a big shift in terms of how consumers are wanting to interact with contact centers, with enterprises with which they're dealing on a regular basis. And what I'd like to talk a little bit about over the course of my talk today is a little bit about how channels are going to evolve in 2021 and beyond, and what you as contact center professionals need to be thinking about in that regard. And then finally, how the contact center industry needs to adapt to the post-pandemic consumer. And I think that this is a very important factor. Every aspect of life is being changed by the past several months, and it's likely that in many ways that we won't get back to the way we were. And contact centers are no exception. So we'll talk a little bit about what your contact centers, the contact centers that are serving Turkish consumers, as well as potentially consumers in Western Europe and beyond, will need to change in order to be relevant in a very different and very structured market. So with that in place, introduction wise, I think that it's really an understatement to say that the pandemic has changed consumer behavior. Every aspect of buying, every aspect of shopping has really been shifted over the course of the past several months. You know, buying in terms of patterns, there really is no pattern anymore. It's very erratic, and it's really taken on a semblance that we've never seen before. Some industries that we know have experienced some degree of growth, especially elements such as online shopping or e-commerce. Equally, others have literally fallen apart. And here, what I'm thinking is broader retail, perhaps the travel and tourism industry have been badly hit by the pandemic, which means that there's no real pattern in terms of the economy lifting all boats, shall we say. COVID-19 is really the single defining factor when somebody goes out to buy something. And I think that we can say that for a fact. The reality is that people are more willing to put off a purchase, or they're more willing to consider a purchase than they ever have been, at least in my lifetime, given the fact that they're uncertain about the way things are going. And I also think it's important to recognize that the hangover, that the spillover of this mentality is going to be long lasting. We saw this in the Great Recession of the early 90s. We saw this with the global financial crisis in the late 2000s, and we'll see this with COVID-19 as well. Contact centers need to be in place with the right structures to make sure that they have all the right elements in place to be relevant to the enterprises that they're servicing and to the consumers that they're supporting. Now, some of these factors include changing the business models, making sure that the contact center is more virtualized than ever before, that the technology is in place to support the consumers as well, and the compliance is going to be a main factor in regards to how support is being done and how support is being handled. Now let's talk a little bit about the post-pandemic consumer. There's a few things to think about when you're talking about individuals going out and buying things in the post-pandemic period. I think the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that the consumer themselves, from a psychological standpoint, have really been hit hardly by the pandemic. You know, I think that there was a lot of speculation that prior to March of this year that the global economy was heading into a slowdown, that we were entering into a bit of a recessionary period. But really, the pandemic accelerated that and produced what I would say are probably some of the most uncertain times economically that I can ever remember in my lifetime. It's highly likely that these will have been the worst times in any of our lifetimes. And these uncertain economic times are definitely going to impact buyer behavior. Now, when you think about the fact that we've seen a broad level of economic decline, we've seen contraction in many markets and many industries, this has had a net impact in terms of unemployment. And when you have unemployment, you have consumers that are much less likely to make a major purchase. They're certainly not going to go on any vacations over the course of the next at least 12 to 18 months. It's unlikely that business travel is going to resume anytime soon. There's a great likelihood that major purchases such as homes or automobiles or major appliances or major leisure purchases will be put off. So what I'm trying to get at here is, from the contact center standpoint, it's very important for anybody in this sector, which we know is driven by consumer activity. It's very important to recognize how over the near to medium term, so again, the next 9 to 15 months, what we're going to look for consumers to be taking on in terms of their behavior. So some of the elements, I've put 5 down here that I want to enunciate to the conference. First of all, I think it's more likely that a consumer is going to be taking a much greater time when making a buying decision. So whether it is a major purchase or even perhaps what might have been considered a leisure purchase, even 2-3 years ago, or even a year ago, this is likely going to take a lot more reflection. They're going to be thinking a lot more, do I need this? Can I afford to spend this money? Is there going to be a potential disruption in terms of my employment or my family's revenue or my family's income, which will make this purchase redundant in a short amount of time? Now, the odds are that consumers will want to make these purchases and that they might very well lean to it, but they'll be taking a lot more time to do so, which will have a direct impact in terms of customer experience as they look for reasons to make a purchase or perhaps to find out a little bit more about a product or service. They'll be looking for reasons to postpone sizable purchases, whether it's perhaps major renovations to a home, whether it's buying a home or a condominium, whether it's buying an automobile. The reality is, in these uncertain times, consumers will be in a position where they're going to be much more likely to think to themselves, boy, it's probably going to be a better idea to wait maybe a quarter or 6 months or even a year to make this purchase, even if they actually need it, because of the fact that they are so uncertain about what their employment situation will look like, what the broader economy will look like, and whether or not it's going to be viable in terms of what they need to do at the present time. Certainly, I think that purchases are going to carry on a greater level of durability. No longer, I think that individuals are going to be as frivolous where they'll think, well, I'll buy something, and if it doesn't work out after a year or two, perhaps I'll throw it away or I'll sell it on and I'll buy something else, perhaps something that's more modern or more updated. Watch for consumers going forward to buy cars that they'll be able to drive longer, to buy homes in which they're planning to live longer and less likely to try and flip, perhaps for profit or perhaps for the fact that they need to move to somewhere that's a better location for their convenience or that they need more room. They'll be looking to make purchases that are going to last them a lot longer, which means that they won't have to have the uncertainty of spending more money in the near to medium term. I think equally, shopping for better deals wherever possible is going to be something that you're going to notice too. Is it more likely in 2021 and beyond that consumers are going to be thinking about what's going to be a better deal for them in terms of spending less money and getting more value? Are they going to be going out and shopping on that value basis? I believe that they will. And especially when it comes to certain, perhaps more day-to-day items, they won't necessarily want to spend as much money on goods or services that perhaps might have been a little bit more frivolous. They'll be looking at what they can do in terms of buying more for less. And finally, they're going to be increasingly willing to interact if they're not pleased with a purchase. And we've been picking up on this, that there's such a level of uncertainty and such a level of insecurity in the broader consumer economy. They're more likely to interact with an organization in terms of saying that they're not happy with what they've bought, or there's a problem with what they bought, or they want it fixed, or they want something rectified, they want restitution. And contact center professionals need to be very aware of this, because the level of tone and the level of potential aggressiveness amongst consumers is something that I think across sectors they're going to need to be taking on due to the uncertainty and due to the insecurity of individuals in regards to how they're buying and what they're buying. So let's talk a little bit about how consumers are buying and how that is shifting. Well, look, I think we knew for a while that the shift towards online purchases has been a major factor in the broader economy, whether it's Turkey, whether it's Western Europe, North America, Australia, whether it's parts of the Middle East and Africa. There's no two ways about it. Online shopping has really been the facet in terms of how consumers have wanted to buy over the course of the last little while. And you can look up, there's some amazing statistics over the course of the past 3 to 4 years in regards to how organizations, established big box retailers, have shifted towards online. But this has been accelerated, as we all know, over the course of the past several months. And I would ask anybody on this conference, how many times a week do your doorbells ring in regards to providing you with delivery people who are bringing you purchases that you've made online? I know that in my house, it probably rings several times a week with different items I'm buying, whether it's for work, whether it's for leisure, whether it's for any element of my life. Online is really the way I'm buying, and it can be clothing, it can be technology, it can be consumer goods, you name it. Enterprises across sectors have been dealing with this fallout, and I think that this fallout is very telling. People are much less likely to go into a storefront or to go into a big box retailer or an office or any type of an organization that provides face-to-face selling of goods and services. This has really been a major element in terms of this big shift in regards to e-commerce, and certainly as it comes to COVID-19, considering the fact that it's very much an element where people don't want to get sick and they want to limit their exposure, very much understandably. Now, what this means is that there has been purchases, but it's all going, or certainly to a large degree, going online. What that means for organizations is that there's less need for in-store staff, and there's less need for real estate in regards to housing these storefronts, but the CX requirements have gone up. So if you're thinking about more individuals who are purchasing online, that's going to mean a requirement for a larger number of digital interactions, meaning the contact center sector has had to shift very quickly. There's certainly people telephoning to express a concern or to ask a question, but there's a lot more with online buying that's being driven into the digital side of things. More emails, more instant messages, more social media interactions, more SMS. There's all sorts of different factors that are playing in here that are being driven by e-commerce, and consumers are looking to try and interact. And what's interesting too is, I think from the contact center standpoint, think about your own experiences. Think about when you've made an online purchase, whether it's perhaps ordering something from an online meal service or ordering a package that's being delivered for a good that you've bought. You know, how many times when you need to try and interact with the organization, do you go and you look on the website or the application on your phone, and what you find immediately is you can't actually call them. They want you to send a message. They want you to contact them by typing a note, but you can't phone them. Only very rarely can you get a hold of these organizations by the telephone, and that's going to impede this whole shift in terms of digital. And one final note on this: work from home management is going to be essential. You know, the reality is, we've talked about how there's less need for real estate and in-store staff, but the move towards work at home is real. It's happening, and it's something that I really believe that no matter if you're in Turkey or any other market in the world, when you're managing consumers going into 2021 and beyond, you need to be conscious of the fact that you're going to be doing work from home alongside bricks and mortar operations. Now, I want to go back to digital for a second, and this information comes from a recent survey I concluded of approximately 550 buyers in major demand markets around the world. And you can see them: Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Spain, UK, and the States. And what we see here is that in 2020, the bulk of workstations that we see in the major key demand markets are going to be digitized, okay? The number of voice-only workstations that we're seeing in major demand markets is now the minority of workstations. Most organizations are ensuring that their workstations are digitally enabled, whether it's 100% digital interaction or perhaps a mix of supporting some voice customers and some customers that are using the online method. So certainly, as I know, the Turkish contact center sector is being very aggressive and very enthusiastic about supporting consumers in different parts of the world from a nearshore and offshore perspective. Keeping in mind this element of digital interactions will be crucial to make sure that you're equipped in the right way to be able to take on these clients, as well as domestic clients, which I know are probably showing the exact same tendencies as what we're seeing in North America, Western Europe, and Australia. And a question you're probably asking is, what are the types of channels that are being used? And what we can see here is that from the standpoint of the different channels that enterprises are deploying, certainly social media and email are very important. But take a look at some of the other ones that are at play here: text messaging, web chat, using instant messaging, deploying chat bots, deploying video chat, and virtual assistants. All of these factors are elements that really tie into a good strategic mix of channels. So for the most part, I would say going into 2021, any enterprise or outsourced contact center will need to make sure that it not just has a voice, but it's also got the right mix of digital channels. Now, that might look differently depending on what sector you're in, but the reality is making sure that you're equipped with as many as are relevant to your consumer base will be very, very important as they aim to try and get a hold of you to perhaps ask a question about something they're thinking about buying, or to ask a question on a purchase they've made, or to try and get support on a purchase. Making sure that you're able to support using digital means the consumer in the post-pandemic period will be so, so crucial to your success from a CX perspective. Now, how are contact centers going to need to adapt? Well, first of all, enable remote working facilities. Enabling home-based agents will be crucial alongside your facilities-based bricks and mortar contact center operations. There's a big debate right now in terms of which model is going to be the one that's going to win out, which one's going to be more popular in the post-pandemic period. The reality is that as contact center operators, you're going to need to be able to deploy both. The consumer won't care. The consumer is only going to be interested in, is my problem solved, and how well was it solved? I think that the possibility of surges in the post-pandemic period will be big. There's a lot of consumers that are putting off buying certain products and services. And when we're in a post-pandemic period, the aftershock or perhaps the acceleration of purchases could be very, very pronounced. And that's where home-based agents will be able to help in that regard. But I would say this, there's already signs of agents who are working remotely, showing some fatigue and perhaps some stress about this. Most individuals that were shifted to their homes to work over the course of the past several months are not people that have really been what I would say the ones who are most interested in doing this type of business model working, and they're finding it very stressful. So certainly from the standpoint of managing a contact center that's going to be working with consumers that are much more factored in regards to wanting better qualities of service, faster, better, more efficient, having a workforce that's showing signs of fatigue could be problematic. Compliance has to be a maximum when you're doing the support for consumers in a post-pandemic period. Certainly, more remote working means that you've got to be able to support consumers with watertight security. Now, when I say watertight security, that means in a physical standpoint, it also means digital monitoring, making sure that the agents are doing everything that they should be, more importantly, that they're not doing things that they shouldn't be, making sure that the security and the elements around security are such that only the agent themselves can access the workstation, that the information on the workstation is as locked down as possible. And if there's any signs of abuse or any signs of misbehavior in managing consumer information, that's taken on as quickly as possible and addressed. Digital enablement, as I mentioned before, is going to be crucial in the Turkish contact center context, as well as everywhere else in the world. Agents are going to need to have the online communications capabilities to deal with consumers that are more willing to do non-voice interactions than ever before. All relevant digital channels have to be in place for the industry in question. If they're not, you're going to lose out on opportunities of interacting with the consumers, and the consumers will not be pleased with this. Investing, in my opinion, in automated solutions that are driven by artificial intelligence will be very, very important. By doing so, you'll be able to at least automate some processes on the front end in order to try and correctly channel the right individual consumer to the right agent who will be able to help them out with a problem. Equally, these solutions might be in a position to actually solve the consumer's problem before they need to get to an agent. And I've been a big believer that automation and artificial intelligence factored into that automation question will be so important in terms of helping the agent out, in terms of providing them with the tools as they go through an interaction, whether it's voice or digital, to make sure that the interaction is as solid as possible. But the key here, ladies and gentlemen, is prepare to adapt. Make sure that your industry is as resilient as possible. Make sure that you're in a position to be able to change as you need to change with regards to what's going on in the sector, in regards to how consumers are evolving, whether it's in Turkey or in the nearshore and the offshore. There's no blueprint about how things are going to go. Nobody knows what's going to happen in 2021 and beyond, but we have a good idea. But the key here is recognizing that there's different scenarios, recognizing that there's different simulations you could come up with, and being ready to adapt to each different one. If you can do that, then you're probably going to be in a great position. And with that in mind, I think that it's important to recognize that we are in a global industry, and that as an advisor, as somebody who's worked in the contact center space now for almost 20 years and who's had the pleasure of visiting Turkey many, many times, I'm always open. My door is always open to you. And if you have any questions now, I'd be happy to answer them. Equally, if you have any questions later on, you can see my website and my email address, and feel free to drop me a note. So with that, I'll stop talking and I'll throw the floor open in case anybody wants to ask me anything right now.